But I think the main thing that's really of interest is when the ground is going to get hard, and is Russia actually going to push forward at some point in the near future? Because when we've been seeing day after day, every day there's a new video of some Ukrainian or something that is under their control, be it some sort of American junk or EU junk or old Soviet junk getting blown up. You kind of have to wonder when they actually run out of essentially the ability to resist any sort of Russian forward progress. So we're going to see. I think it's probably more likely to see a Russian offensive in the near future than this Ukrainian counteroffensive, because I don't quite know what they're going to do. I mean, apparently they have something like 40,000 guys being trained somewhere in Europe, so they say. But what is 40,000 infantry going to do? In a 21st century warfare, I would say arguably nothing. Yeah. So I'm not quite sure. I think there's a little bit of things happening beyond the reach of the media sphere about the planning and the strategy that I can't quite comment on.
Interesting. Yeah, I think you're right on. And the thing is that you have in the West with this retired General Benjamin Hodges, who's doing this information war campaign, and he's like the one where you get the opposite world numbers, right?
Yeah.
You had, for example, for whatever people think about him, I think it's a positive sign that he's running, and that he's running as a Democrat is going to red pill a lot of Democrats if the DNC pretends to have any kind of process or conversation. I mean, I understand that the incumbent normally is the assumed without much of a conversation, candidate for the party, but Biden, just kind of talking American baseball real fast, you kind of got with what's happening, with what Kennedy said recently is that, the Pentagon leaks show that the Russians are losing only 1/7 what the Ukrainians are losing.
Yeah.
And as people are coming to be aware of this, right, as people are becoming red pilled to this, how is it that you get these people? Because we had this just because this is an interesting subject. I was able to. I'm almost not consuming any what do you call it, social media content at all, right? I don't get any YouTube in. I don't nothing, right?
Yeah.
And but I got to because it's you, right? So that was important to me, and
Thank you.
I watched your. It's there's with my friends, I'm gonna get into their stuff. I get on the queue, I got kids and I got all kinds of shit, right? But it was important to me to do, and I got into it, and it was the one that you're having that kind of first. It was a very friendly conversation, and then it kind of got into a weird debate, where you had to kind of lecture this guy, young man, I guess he needed the dressing down, but it was Rollo. Was it Rolo Slavsky or Slavisky or something?
Oh my gosh! And I'm not saying this to try to. I'm not forgetting his name because I feel superior to him or anything. But it was something like Rolo Slav something. Oh my gosh, I can't remember. I'm sorry. Let me try to look it up while you continue on here. Maybe I can find it.
Right. And the setup. Basically the setup. I don't think he understands what the setup is because I listening to the interview at a later time when you're like, oh yeah, all these different types of NSBM and melodic and polyrhythms. He's like, oh, I didn't know about music and this kind of specific stuff. And he's like, oh my God, this guy doesn't know who he's talking to, right? Like he doesn't know all these things he was talking about, distributism and or astral projection or what all these things. It's like this is stuff that we've been knowing in our source material for ages, right? So I was like, man, this guy doesn't even know who he's talking to. So then because he's ultimately, and it's an important demographic in the information war, actually, because, and I don't think the guy understands, well, he would, because there's a little audience for it that's black pill, and it's supposed to be pro-Russian, right? But it's actually all of the Ukrainian talking points about everything.
Absolutely.
We're the real Russians, but the Moscow establishment has to collapse, right?
Yeah.
Like that's everything that Ukrainian, not the Galicians, but the neo-Nazism, Ukrainian neo-Nazism, the type that says we're the real Russians, because there's like 5 brands or 35 brands or whatever, but there's a important type among some of these that says that we're the real Russians, right? And that the Muscovites are some kind of Mongol time of hard times or whatever, usurpers.
Well, yeah.
Temporarily
and
occupying
the
some aspect
them,
of
or at least when it was 10 years ago, the king of that kind of guy was that Alexei Navalny character.
Right.
He represented the unification of the Moscow liberals and what Russians would call either like the whites, but more commonly Vlasovцы. There was this guy Vlasov who became a general of like the Russian, like anti-occupational forces or whatever. Basically, the Russian side that sided with Hitler. So was Vlasov.
Yes, right. That's the thing, yeah. And so, I mean, I hope that I'm just setting this up, and then I hope that you do the majority of the talking. People are here for you.
No problem.
But I'm just setting this up. I'm setting this up for you. So the guy is like what happens. The guy doesn't realize that he's actually very representative of a demographic not in the sense that, of course, he should expect to have some audience, right? Because those are corollaries, as I'm saying, but in the sense that he's typical. You see what I mean? Like, I don't think he understands what a meme he actually is, or maybe he does and it's funny and it works, but who knows to what level. He's an intelligent enough guy that he would understand instantly what I'm saying. So the thing is, he moved to Russia, right, expecting it to be like a national conservative, like a neo-fascist traditionalist state or something like that, where Tsar Putin had triumphed over the Jewish oligarchy, right? And what he found instead is that, Russia is a country with all kinds of people and many of the problems, but in some of them less, some of them small than you have in the West, right? And he was shocked that there was going to be work that he'd have to do to actually dig into the Russian project, that it wasn't going to be handed to him as like a ready-made solution, right?
Yeah. Well, that's you opened a kind of a very big topic here, and I think
that's why we brought you on, dude. Yeah, no small talk about Bakhmut and May 9th, and what I mean.
Let's leave Bakhmut behind, because with Bakhmut we have this situation where it's kind of a question of whose information is true, just how many guys do they have left, to what extent is this actually just sort of waiting for the ground to get hard, or is there something else happening? There's a little bit of let's just say mystery to it. Whereas with this kind of topic, I think things are a little bit more on the factual side. Then the simple fact is that Joaquin, as someone who's been sort of quasi C-list famous in Russia for a long time, both in Russian and becoming more so in English. I think my English language career has kind of picked up over the last few years. I can say that I get a lot of messages from people, and from people from the West, be they like this guy who's supposedly ethnically Russian, who speaks Russian as a native language or whatever, but was born in the West. When you talk to a lot of people from the West... Yeah,
he has like a heavy accent. I don't know if that was affect or what, but his accent was heavy.
Oh, you think? I didn't really hear very much, but then again, I'm getting older and deafer, so who knows? I don't know. That's kind of neither here nor there. I could say that people who are really brought up with the Western mentality, there's a certain kind of group of them that gets excited about Russia because they project some sort of white nationalist vision onto Russia, which doesn't really exist here, which is kind of like what you were saying. Because the more you go, away from America, even onto Western Europe, the less the idea of race becomes like this big thing. Okay,
Right. It's a
Joaquin.
Western idea, is what I was saying, that in internet culture popping up, and that this guy's like a product of internet culture. But he turned out that he's an American citizen and a Ukrainian citizen, and in that sense, not Russian at all.
Yeah.
And then all his perspectives on the war, like exactly like what's happening next, are based on some combination of Ukrainian propaganda mixed with what General Benjamin Hodges thinks is happening.
Yeah. And one thing, Joaquin, so I have a question for you as someone who lives in the Balkans, is maybe kind of an example. If we were to take, the people in the Balkans who have quite a bit of enmity. Wait, enmity. Wait, no, I can't even remember the English anymore. They don't like each other. There we go. We'll go basic language today. A lot of people don't like each other. If we were to take some, you got your Serbs, your Croats, some of these guys from Kosovo, and we were to shave everybody's head and make everybody wear the same clothing, would these people look very similar or very different?
They look very similar.
Okay. And now so this is the thing, and this is one of the things which is so maddening about wokeness, is all it takes is even to just look at just the history of the Balkans, which I actually got in my crappy school upbringing. We actually did discuss this, and you can see that this whole racial concept is only applies to like the United States and maybe possibly like Brazil or somewhere during like the slave trade, this triangle between Africa, Europe, and the New World. It applies to that. But when you go beyond that, it really starts to break down. And so these people, they come to Russia and they expect there to be some sort of white nationalist culture here when there was never the grounds for that. Russia always expanded and assimilated. Another example from Simple Life. With my, I maybe shouldn't say the names, quite the exact names, but I'll put it this way. My son plays a lot of soccer very seriously here in Russia, and some of the boys have very stereotypical Christian names, and some of the boys have very stereotypical Muslim names. Can you tell the difference between them? No, because everyone intermixed. And again, you can't come to Russia and be like white nationals, this, that, or the other, because it doesn't really exist in this culture of sort of grander assimilation, and mixing between people is good, especially if we were to look at the attitude of more glorious conquering people of the past, was go in and take the wives of the people you conquered and have kids with them. This is awesome. And they come in with these expectations in Russian history. It just doesn't suit that box, even though Russians have a European external features that make them look different than, say, Africans. You just can't expect history to work this way when it's been completely different here.
Yeah, I mean, so it's been like, well, you look at like the English in their colonization practice was kind of based upon maintaining the characteristics of the homogeneity of their Englishness, what have you, right? Whereas the Spanish, who had themselves already long been, well, you've got the Visigothic Spaniards, you've got the the Lebanese Carthaginian Spaniards, you've got the indigenous Spaniards of Spain, you've got the North African influence, right? You've got so many different Spains, and that by the time of the conquistadors in the New World, they kind of had a culture that transcended these different ideas of race, right?
Yeah.
That they then brought in the New World with, then they kind of Hispanized that. They intermarried, and they created like a single culture, right? It wasn't like this putting the Indians on the reservations thing, right? So it was a different. I'm not saying this is morally superior. I'm just talking about what happened historically as a generality. Of course, there's exceptions, and sometimes the English did it more like Spanish or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it could have happened any other way. I'm not condemning history here. I'm just talking about where these ideas come from, right? So Russia kind of did things more similar to like the Spanish as opposed to the English. So that kind of, if you're going to compare, I mean, Russia did things the Russian way, but if you were to say what's more like how they did things, you know what I mean? It's kind of more like the Spanish, but the result is you have people that are, you know, Tatar or half Tatar or whatever, and they're Russian. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah.
So, and then it's like, because he was talking about kids like, some kids were beating up some Central Asian migrants, and the police intervened on behalf of the Central Asian migrants, and this is evidence, you know, that Putin is controlled by the Jews.
Yeah, yeah, oh boy, that stuff. Yeah, that was basically one of his arguments, and which is why this morning I randomly saw this article here that I can't translate very well, Joaquin, but I can say that basically 4 gypsies apparently killed some woman in Russia. They don't say what ethnicity the woman is, and but it's judging by her picture here that they've shown. She's definitely not a gypsy herself, and they're all facing, 2 of them are going to get 21 to 23 years because they actually committed the murder, and the other 2 who were just sort of there are getting 5 and 6.5 years. And as we know, Russian prisons are brutal, so that's essentially 4 death sentences. So again, it's like one of those things where when we're talking off the cuff about this stuff, you can really, and again, this is going back to the black pill mentality, rather than looking at the grander scope of all of Russia and how things actually work in a country and how much crime there is. These people tend to pick out this one thing that happened that doesn't really suit them, and they just jump on it. But at the same time, they jump on it and they flip out over it. But do they ultimately take action? No. Generally, the sort of takeaway from this that they give is sort of like, all hope is lost, we're defeated. You see what I mean?
Right.
Because one thing I wanted to mention before I forget about it, because I actually took the time, it took me a long time to find this video, is this is kind of going back to Nietzsche, and I just wanted to say that Nietzsche, or Nietzsche, as they say the more Russian way, I don't know the German way because I don't speak German. I'm not going to say that everything he said is right or wrong. I'm not bringing him up as this like amazing argument from authority that he's like the ultimate philosopher of wisdom here. But he kind of put things, even way back when in the 1800s, he put people into these sort of like 4 categories of like 2 types of Übermenschen and 2 types of Untermenschen. And I think that this is where we're getting into this whole concept of the red pill, the blue pill, and the black pill actually goes back to Nietzsche. Because Nietzsche has this kind of guy that he calls the last man, that is devoid of any creative urge within and blind to higher values which render creativity possible. Essentially, this is the blue pill man. This is the person who accepts things the way they are. If society says that cutting the dick off of kids is going to make people more equal, sure, I support that because I'm just a gear in the machine. That's their entire life. They are just there, like some sort of, I don't know, cog in the system. There's another type that he calls the slave. A festering hatred of life is generated within them by feelings of impotence in the face of an external reality felt to be overpowering and threatening. This creates feelings of envy. And later on, Nietzsche goes on to say that this type of person, the slave, actually has the desire to sort of band together against like people who are more creative and successful and just sort of drag them down by any means possible. And I think that this is what the nature of this sort of black pill is. Blue pill, when we're talking about, mostly in modern times, this actually relates to dating, which is interesting because this person we are talking about chose to have Rollo as their handle. Now, Rollo Tomasi was some sort of band in like the 70s or something, but the more famous person called Rollo Tomasi is a like heavy metal psychologist who is a men's advocate and, basically tells men how to essentially deal with the troubles that women present and all this other stuff. He has a lot of good stuff to say. But from the dating market, we see the blue pill is believing is the Disney fantasy of just like, if you just wait around, someone will love you. There's a person for everyone. The red pill of dating is sort of seeing things from a male standpoint, that if you're a man, you've got to be productive, you've got to somehow grow tall, you've got to make that money, you've got to become interesting, you've got to become confident in order to, it requires a lot of work and effort in order to basically have sex. And the black pill thing is that, if you're not the ultimate Giga Chad by birth, everything's hopeless and no woman will ever be with you. So you need to go, men going your own way, MGTOW. You give up So essentially, you're doing the same thing as the blue pill. You're submitting to the system, but you're doing it in this way that makes you feel so cool that you're giving up on women. You're just surrendering to the impossibility of it, but in your surrender, you're the cool guy. And so this is what we're seeing when these people tend to talk about these racial crimes. It's like, I noticed it. I see that there's this evil and that they're coming to take our country, or it's already been taken in this guy's opinion. But they find some sort of, I don't know, according to Nietzsche, slave-like glee in being able to sort of see it, whereas others don't, but yet do nothing.
Right.
Okay, so I thought that was a sort of mental.
He doesn't know who he's talking to when he's talking to you, because here now you're talking about Nietzsche or what have you, and the guy at the end when you were basically calling the question is, so like, look, like to survive and to win this, like number one, like you yourself need to have children, and not like in the sense of Genghis Khan and who knows how many kids Tim has or Joaquin has running around the world, or this guy has, like, but actually ones that you're raising, right, that you're investing in. And then you have to be engaged in the world that these children of yours are attached to, and that their outcomes are in some ways tied to, right? And you have to be invested and involved. You can't just have this kind of petty bourgeois dilettantism where you can sort of ridicule everything in a pseudo-Nietzschean way at a distance, as if you're just passing through life as an observing journalist, riding the tiger. And the guy he was just basically saying, oh yeah, Russia's great. You can, basically there's lots of whores in Russia. You can have a good time. You can party, as, basically he's making this kind of weird reference to, this Evolin. And he kind of had this Evolin idea about himself, kind of princely, kind of aristocratic and unrecognized, pseudo aristocrat, from an upper middle class family or whatever. And all these weird kind of things that, Russia may have to burn. Maybe Russia has to be destroyed, but I'll be living in whatever, Switzerland or New York or whatever.
Well, ultimately, his thing was that he would be okay as long as he gets to live in some pocket of the remnants of Russia where like everybody's white. That would be okay. Which also is in line with, again, Alexei Navalny, who one of his key things
I've
on
written
his
about
rise
this
to power
for so long.
He basically said that, hold on.
It's a type.
Well, Navalny said that all the parts of Russia that aren't majority Russian or strong majority Russian need to be just cut off, which is why the State Department loves him, because he has that same mentality.
But it's too close. It's so specific. It's such a specific and strange solution for that to also be white nationalism. Do you see what I'm saying? Because like that, it's obviously that this is a U.S. State Department talking point. And it's just weird that this guy, that every talking point that he has, I'm not saying he's conscious of it, but I just don't know to what extent he's aware that he's a meme, or that his consciousness has been heavily manicured, because it's typical, right?
Yeah.
Like it's typical, meaning that there's a type in it. You see what I mean? It's predictable. Like you can predict what he says about anything. Like you already knew what he believed about everything at a certain point.
To an extent, well, it's because I've run into this type of person many times in my
the
various
point. It's
discussions.
typical.
The sort of, well, also because remember, in a way, like I just mentioned, how the black pill, in a way, is like the dark mirror of the blue pill, in its love of inaction. So, Joaquin, let's talk about like woke people. What do we think about the woke people who actually create the woke ideology? Not just some schmuck who's like, I'm a teacher in San Francisco and I want to have gay lessons at my class. Not like that person, but the people who actually kind of think of the ideas, come up with the plans. Well, who are they? Usually some sort of strange appearance, no kids, all day drinking coffee. They're sitting around at their laptop thinking that they're revolutionizing and saving the world by some sort of gender feeling nonsense. Very cosmopolitan, very bourgeois, as you just used the term, just sitting around coffee and computers by themselves and all this other stuff. Nationalists, for the most part, pretty much are exactly the same type of person, only they're in maybe a nicer looking shirt and wearing dark colors. They are the same type.
You know what? It's the same. You go to a coffee house. It's this. This is fucking kicked back to the late '80s and the '90s. This is like Seattle coffee house culture. This is like some brooding kind of, grunge metal, Nazi hippie guy, all those things. I'm into tantric sex and Hitler. You know, because why not, right? You know, in a coffee house in Seattle in the early '90s, and Sub Pop label or whatever, bands and shit. What was going on then? Nirvana and all this, and then you got this is like a very typical thing. Guys with the beanie, the black beanie, kind of and the beard and the zigzags, like looking like the guy on the zigzags packet, right?
Yeah.
Looks that guy. He's like a
yeah, exactly. And so the thing is, when we look at this, we can really see that there's this similarity in this type of person, and this is also where we see this sort of why there's this amalgamation throughout all of Europe, where there's a lot of this the most Western influence, especially in Ukraine, but you can see this with French nationalists and all the other nationalists, that you have this amalgamation of really this same type of person, that both the liberal and the nationalist are kind of both the same, and they both ultimately serve the end goal. Their narcissism and their selfishness and their lack of desire to really do anything other than sit around and talk and come up with abstract ideas definitely serves that whole depopulation agenda, that's for sure. And that's kind of what I got into him with this. Because one thing, Joaquin, I would also ask you is, so why do certain ethnicities, they need these nationalists, they need these people who sort of stand up and say that they're the unelected leader there of a particular ethnicity? You know who doesn't have those kind of people? Amish. They just have a lot of children. They don't need them. And they really
I mean your general point, like, just so people have a background, is that rather than trying to get organized people to beat up immigrants, right? Like, how about try to decide that you're going to have a family, right? And then see, there's going to be hard times, and there's going to be sacrifice, and but if you bring the people into the world, then that'll like bring to you the fight that you need to make the space for them that they're going to need, right? And there's really not another. You can't synthesize that. You know what I mean? You can't philosophize. You can't philosophize that into existence.
To him is like, okay, if you're going to do this job of being a nationalist, first off, if you go around the country, generally, there are some professions where people get sort of mixed up and shipped from all over. Basically, if you want to work at the big tech companies, you have to live in Moscow, for example. But one thing where the guy is always a local yokel are the cops. So it's kind of like, okay, so on the one hand, we always have this picture of Russia's corrupt, the police are not really reined in, which this guy sort of agreed with that sort of view of things. So it's like, well, why don't you then work with the police to actually kind of create this network, almost just like a, Masonic society within the police that are going to sort of agree with you, and that Russian people are going to look out for each other, much like certain ethnicities do who live a diaspora lifestyle. They all kind of look out for each other. Like, why not do that? No. It's just endless, because everything ultimately ends in no. And also, Joaquin, I did an interview with someone who I don't want to bash on the guy too much because he's a former politician, but he sort of, when I got into his sort of black pill diagnosis, again, his ultimate thing was, it's like, okay, if everything is hopeless, if we are already completely under control, the New World Order's won, everything in Russia's fake, everything in the West is fake, all of our lives, everything, it's game over. Why do you even bother with this? Why not just give up and go hedonism and ride it out? And he's like, well, we need to monitor this. This obsession, again, of where I'm very different from this type of person myself, not to say that I'm superior, is I lack
need to monitor this. I'm bleeding out. Let's monitor this. Yeah.
If you look at the someone's psychological profile, there's 5 factors, which I can never remember, but one of them I believe is like conscientiousness, which is like how much you really pay attention to details. Can you tolerate a sock being on the floor? And my conscientiousness, I guess, is very low. And it also seems like people who are very obsessive and pedantic tend to lean black pill, because for them it's like, okay, well, if there's a strong preference that women, again, going back to the dating thing of black pill, it's like, well, women really prefer men who are like 6 foot tall to 6'5". So I'm 5'10", so I have no hope, give up. And it's like, you kind of don't get it. It's like they see this as it's like this eternal game of with these women. And to be honest, the ultimate goal of this is to get married. And there's divorce, so people get married twice or whatever. So it's essentially going to the casino and having to win twice. But they can't see it because they're like, I'm 5'10". They want men over 6 feet tall. I have no hope. You see?
Well, people get these things in their head, or they take the thing is that the mindset that you're talking about is taking something that might be generally true, you know what I mean, and then thinking that it's not understanding how numbers work, and then thinking that it's true in every case, or that it's like the only factor out of 10 or 20 factors that a potential partner is looking for in someone, right? So it's kind of like, and it's also just so it's a heavily internet Western phenomenon.
Yeah,
the whole thing, the whole like thing that where there's like a specific problem with women as human beings or something like that there's something specifically flawed with them is a really weird, it's a very strange perspective that's only possible when it's like fostered in I'm not saying that these guys are the source of the problem, but life, I understand that there's in the West, there's a radical push to, that's in the area of family law and things like that, with men. Like there's a radical push to remove men from the lives of children, like fathers rather specifically from the lives of their children. Like I understand that from a legal perspective. In culture, you watch like sitcoms and commercials, there's always like idiot dad and know-it-all mom, all these tropes, right? But the thing is that, life throws these things at you, but you got to keep pushing forward. You know what I mean? It's you got to get these like kind of Stallone, pep talks. You got to, what I mean? It's not how hard that you can, hit. It's how hard you can get hit and keep on going, right? And
that's one thing is I don't know where, again, maybe this is with the death of traditional religion in society, but
when you take it for like 3 minutes, when you take this for 3 minutes, I gotta mute. I'm with you, I'm listening, but I gotta mute this for 3 minutes.
I can take over things. Well, anyways, dear audience, I can say that like if we look at traditional religions, whether it be Christianity, whether it be Islam, whether it be Buddhism, none of them ever say that life is easy, or that we can just that you should have everything provided to you. In a lot of ways, I think this kind of maybe links up to that whole concept of like the prosperity gospel, where if God's on my side and everything's on my side, I should get everything I want. And this kind of also goes back to this whole thing about these people who are generally then disappointed by Russia. It's like, well, Russia kind of did some of the COVID stuff, but not really, and for 100 days, and this, that, and the other. But they didn't do everything exactly the way I wanted it, exactly the moment, so that means they're part of this. It's very much, I think, related to, again, this sort of kiddie narcissism, where if I don't get everything exactly the way I want, then I'm going to break up the country even further, so I can have my own little perfect place to live in without the greater context that life is not going to be good. Joaquin, if you're out there, I actually did a very interesting interview, I think, in my own opinion, with one of the biggest advocates for Californian independence. But I said in the interview that that's a bad idea, because people get this all excited about cutting everything up to be as little as it can be. But the real, it's because they, want to have control over it, or they're offended by the rest of the country or whatever. But it takes the real greater strength to build something that is great and that is bigger. And I think that, again, this pathetic nationalism is just very destructive. But again, one thing that we also can't remember is that this pathetic nationalism, this type of person there who might be on their Substack or their what else is there besides Substack, their Patreon, who's created this new weird pseudo pro-Russian kind of movement there. Remember what side of the line they're on, Joaquin, because right now it is very hard to get money from the West to here. You basically have Bitcoin or whatever, cryptocurrencies, and that's about it. And when the war started, all the people who pumped that stuff who are supposedly living in Russia, boy, they all seem to vanish for one reason or another. They'll have a lot of
Well,
excuses.
yeah, his story about getting kicked out of Russia
Yeah.
was a little bit suspicious.
Well, if it does for me,
right?
because, dude, I wouldn't call myself exactly an expert in Russian migration law, but I know it.
Yeah,
I know
but
it
you're
very
about
well.
the closest that you're going to find in a practical sense, because
Yeah,
that's one of the
who
main
speaks English
projects
as a
that you're
native
working
language.
on.
Yeah, I'm it. So, yeah, like everything he was
Yeah.
saying about this was not the way that this actually works. So,
But then when he moved to Belarus, he's then kicked out of Belarus, and the reason for that is the intelligence service determined that he's a nuisance.
yeah, and of
So
course
that's probably why the Russians also. But why would that be? Well, because, and he said, oh, all these red flags.
yeah,
But then it's like, and I understand people. I'm not accusing the person of being disingenuous or not having the views that they purport to have.
yeah.
I'm just talking about how typical this is, and how it's the reason that the reason it's interesting to us is not to rag on an individual, but actually because it is typical, because this is actually a milieu.
Oh, and also to be
right?
fair, Joaquin,
milieu,
actually, after that interview,
yeah.
I got so angry. I actually recorded a video of sort of a response to all his points, but it came across as kind of just like me dumping on this guy. So I literally invested 3 hours into a video. I watched it, and I was like, no. This is just too far.
To do. No,
so
I have tons of material never released, and it's like not sending an email. It's like reading the email before you send it,
yeah,
and then be like, I'm not going to.
Yeah, because I was like, I watched it again. And I was like, I made good points, and that's what I'm trying to do today. Because now I've already kind of forgotten about this. So with you today, I think we're trying to be more calm. And again, with this guy, it's kind of hard not to attack certain positions. It's kind of like again with the woke people. It's hard to say, well, your ideology is absolutely repulsive and disgusting and anti-human, but you're not a bad person. Well, you're going to be a little bit offended, but I hope we're doing this in a mature, respectful way.
A person can be. There's many different qualities that we need in a person for them to be, people that we want to have close to us, and honesty is one of them. But then also is a desire to have a degree of self-examination enough that like there's some engine for forward action with the person, right? Like there's got to be everything that's wrong in the world can't simply be external to us, and we can't say that we're such perfect rational calculators that our attitudes about things are entirely determined by some like rational calculator. Like a lot of our attitudes about things are determined by the things that we're doing. You know what I mean? So like if we're not doing things, then we're not going to be, then we have no source for optimism. And one of the things I found is very interesting is because you talked about granularity and specifics and accuracy, that some of these, it's the thing about their black pillism. What they're doing is it's a statistical projection that they're going to fail. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And but they're confusing how statistics work, because statistics are very misrepresentative.
Yeah, and let me just interject here. One thing that was important is he sort of accused me of being anti-intellectual because he brought up some stats and about Russia and stuff, and I kind of didn't want to discuss them. But let me explain then about this with stats. Why is because there's a few things. One, if you look up for statistics about who the happiest people in the world are, you will see articles that say that there's statistics that show it's Scandinavia. You'll see also, I saw an article recently that said it was China. And I've also seen research that shows that it's generally people who are sort of more somewhat semi-primitive, like people kind of live in like the jungles of South America, because they're sort of cut off from a lot of the ills of the modern world, and they have sort of a simple outlook on life, and that brings them happiness. China, because they are sort of on the rise, and they feel a greater sense of whole, and Scandinavia, because they have supposedly this high quality of life. So we can look at statistics and find three radically different truths that all directly contradict each other. So that's part one. Part two, when you live in Russia, and I've read every year you see an article published by major publications about how the Russian economy is going to collapse. And Joaquin, these people don't like fake this. They actually bring up statistical information as to why they think the Russian economy will collapse, and it never does. So Well, I don't, when we're playing this game of statistics, you can see that these statistics are so manipulable. They're so flawed. They can really paint whatever picture you want to find. And that's why I don't think it's intellectually dishonest to kind of take statistics with the really big grain of salt, or, you know what I mean?
Right. The thing is that statistics are really also can be misunderstood or misused. And like another one also is that when you're talking about the likely outcomes for a given person, an individual, which is like the source of the black pilled thing, like my personal outcomes have no hope, right?
Yeah.
Like statistics almost never apply to people in that sense, because the category that you're describing is too large to control for other factors that are known to determine for success. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So typically speaking, the category that you're looking at is going to determine the thing that you come up with. So that's one of the problems. And the thing is that it's really Asperger's syndrome. It's actually what you're talking about. The problem is kind of like a way that of an expression of Asperger's syndrome. But one of the things that's always true is that everyone who does succeed, right? Everyone who does succeed in their plans, or almost everyone who succeeds in their plans, had a dedication to something which was statistically not likely based upon those categories. You see what I'm saying? So it's having one of the most connecting things that you find, even though being delusional is most probably in general as a category is not going to determine success. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. They found that people who were successful, right, were almost all had delusions about the probability of that success. You see? So in other words, without a fanatical belief in what you're doing, you see, you'll almost never find, the outcome that you seek.
Well, yeah. So, here, let me show you a perfect example of that, Joaquin. So if I were to go back in time to when I was a younger man and think, wow, wouldn't it be nice to have this little house in the woods in Russia and be able to make these like sort of intellectual, ideological types of video and written content from there? Wouldn't that be exciting? How the hell where'd that house in the woods come from? Well, besides the fact that I came to Russia, I chose, when my kids were first born, I took a risk and gathered some money from people and actually made a miniature war game, a little Russian competitor to Warhammer. Ultimately, the project failed, but it was profitable. Because of that game, I met this one woman who was who was part of the start of a new Christian TV channel. I work at the Christian TV channel. All of a sudden, everything starts getting a lot better, and I'm able to actually have some nice savings. And with those savings, looked around and found the opportunity to buy a house in the woods. So you see, there's absolutely no way that from point A to point B here, okay, that I could have ever planned this or based some sort of statistics on it. And again, that's kind of what these people is. They want everything to be so insanely rules based, and that's not the way that life works, man. Why do I have a house in the woods? Yes. Because I tried to make a competitor to Warhammer.
Yeah, no, that's what people when people ask me, like, what do you see yourself doing 5 years from now? And I'm like, oh, dude, get out of here. Like, just put me in a grave now. if I'm supposed to know that. I like to work projects that go like 2 to 3, 4 years for sure. Like, I like to know that, and I could work a 5-year project if it was like great. I've done 5-year projects before, but other than that, it's like, no, I don't even want to know, like, of the 3 or 4 fields that I could do well enough in. I don't even want to know what field it would be. I would want to know, maybe you would want to know what it would be in, but I'd be doing the thing now. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think that that is definitely a Western thing that's happened, like in terms of the how we've had to adapt and think about our relationship to work and things like that. But I mean, there's a difference between being red pilled and black pill. Is, you know, none of the things about my life should suggest that they would happen or could or should have happened. I just actually had an irrational, totally irrational belief that if I kept doing it, it doesn't mean you don't do things. I mean, I keep doing it every day. You know what I mean? And multiple hours through the day, right? Every day. Mm-hmm. But by plugging at it, like, you get results, right? You adapt, you change things. But like you're saying, if a person's just going to be in a cafe and pontificate on how creatively they can describe the hopelessness of things,
yeah,
then that's the reality that they're going to create for themselves, you know? And, but it's not reflective of the real situation. Like, you can't be thinking that Russia's on the verge of collapse. Like, you've got to be following the most idiotic Ukrainian propaganda. Like, no one, you know, I mean, how, like, it's weird because you get people, and then what came out of it is the guy didn't want to disclose his age or any aspect of his identity. And Tim, what I was talking about, maybe this is a question to you, is like, how important is it to you when you're assessing someone's ideas that you know biographical information, so you can kind of get where you should be forgiving and where you should be expect more, you know? Like, if I'm talking to a 28-year-old guy and he's got a lot of stuff not fleshed out, like, that doesn't bother me. But you know, your audience needs to know, hey, I'm only 28. I'm not really Russian. They actually kicked me out. You know what I mean?
Well, that's kind of both, because I mean, if someone who is 8 years old says something that's you know, this brilliant truth, and that truth stands the test of competition from a bunch of 40-year-old men, if that happens to happen every once in a while, well, then that 8-year-old is the winner, you know. But when you, I'll put it this way. There is a context that we all live in. So, for example, neither of us come from money. And I think that very much affects the why you and I, although you're supposedly Mexican or something, I'm convinced we're related by blood distantly. Because we kind of look the same in our icons, right. Very similar, but I think it also has to do with our very similar backgrounds in some sense. And that does have an effect on you, and it very much has an effect on people, and we can see that. So yeah, it would be kind of more helpful in these discussions if it was like, okay, this guy, you know, it's like, okay, you know, he is 22, he's kind of at the start of his life, you know, because when I was like in my early 20s, I was very much deep on the sort of I don't even know what you'd want to call it. I would say very much on the left, but still masculine. Like, I don't know, what if the AOC but more hairy, something like that, you know? And as time goes on, and especially after you have children and you see the world in a different light, this all changes.
Yeah, I definitely concur with that. And the thing is, like, you have, you know, with people, when you understand their background, like, also, like myself, like, I don't have, like, you know, this attitude that like, people can, for example, like, if I thought this was just so, it's just so circular, just so bizarre, it's like, it's crazy, right? It's like, the evidence that Russia is a oligarchy or oligarchical kleptocracy that's run by a foreign ethnic group to Russia,
yeah,
is that they're losing the conflict in Ukraine, right? And you're like, oh, disentangling that one, right? Because in the first place, for all what's going on, no one thinks that Russia is losing in Ukraine. People disagree about what the goals are, and then people disagree about how quickly those goals are moving along, and then how stable or not they think that makes things, but not instability to the point of, like, political revolution or something, right? But just in terms of prices and if there's going to be layoffs or something, that's like in the practical sense, right? So, and that's a spectrum of thinking that makes sense, but no one thinks that Russia is losing the war in Ukraine. Like no one with a mind, no one in the West, no one in Russia, no one in Europe, like no one thinks that Russia is losing. So to get that piece of information and for that to be the one that you latch on to, like this being my field, I'm kind of curious, is this person, how organic is it? And I'm willing to, I think it's even more predictive and more expected that this is fully organic. You see what I'm saying? But that's evidence of how informational spheres and specific ideological features can be manicured or groomed, you know.
Well, yeah, and remember, Joaquin,
that's how typical it is.
This picture you just painted is very much based on the logic, which I think ultimately maybe in my life I've failed to convince people of this way of reasoning, because a lot of people don't seem to get it, but you do. That, okay, so because the Russia seems to be based on some information losing the war in Ukraine. That means that it's an oligarchical kleptocracy of people of a different religious ethnicity. That's basically also, remember, people never factor in that sometimes people don't do what they're supposed to do. Sometimes systems are inefficient. Sometimes things screw up. Sometimes we're also dealing with a large entity. People are very convinced that all governments are this single-minded, godlike entity that whatever its stated objectives might be somewhere, that every part of this giant entity is working towards that end. I don't understand why people who've worked at inefficient businesses, gone to inefficient schools, why they can't see the mass inefficiency, the sort of human factor and chaos around us, but they just can't seem to get it, man. It absolutely
that's one
drives
part
me
of it.
nuts.
Yeah. There's a flip side. The flip side of that is then what the people that are more credible are the people who come from within systems that can talk to the chaos and can talk to the inefficiency of it, right?
Yeah.
And then they're the ones who think that they also think that it can never win, right? Like we were talking about the other day on the live stream, how like, you know, every winning side of a real war was amazed that they won because they, you know, the people on the inside, because they knew what their weaknesses were. They had high awareness of their own weaknesses is the long story. And they won despite those things, inefficiencies, whether it was, you know, all the different things you could list. That's a whole other, right? So like we were talking about how it's known in a business that you have like shrink or you have loss, right? Like it's known in a business. So when you're projecting your probabilities and your business strategy where you're giving your report on your outcomes, like you figure that into what you're doing. Like you don't go ahead as if it's not there and then you act surprised each time that you've got, you know, 10 or 15% less or 20% less because of shrink or loss or inefficiency. No, like in the original plan, like in your contingency plans, like one of the contingent factors are the known knowns, such as shrink, loss, you know, institutional corruption, inefficiencies, right? So that's going to be something that people like Shoigu, who are more like managers than military people, right? Yeah. Understand. So, but people turn that on their head, like, oh, Shoigu doesn't understand the military. He's just a numbers and logistics guy, or he's just a management guy. And then it's like every strength they make into a weakness until that weakness is actually a real strength. And then they have to actually just lie about it. They just change what everything means all the time. You know, is it better to have a manager or better to have it, you know, make up your mind. If logistics is the issue, then and if shrink and loss and corruption are issues, then Shoigu is someone that you need in there, right? So it's like they have an upside down world, right?
Well, yeah, and one of the reasons why he is where he is he's not a military man, and that, of course, leads to a lot of conspiracies, but he did fix the Ministry of Extreme Circumstances, or whatever translates into English. So he successfully led the one ministry, and it does work. You call the ambulance, it comes. You get lost in the woods, they find you. He really set that thing straight, and so they were like, okay, now it's your turn to clean up the army. And for the most part, he did. But again, this is like you're saying, he cleaned it up from a managerial, logistical sense. He's, I don't think Shoigu ever, when he went into the military, was sitting at home with the grand maps and Napoleonic soldiers, rolling dice to see what would be the best possibility to flank the enemy, So, yeah, it's
right.
or also, well, one thing is, I can tell you, another thing is that the other sort of piece of evidence is that generally the children of all famous, successful people in Russia are just repulsive. I think that's just sort of a tendency that's very global. That when dad's a billionaire, the kids are shit. Hunter Biden. But, I think that's a little bit also part of the Russian culture, is that a lot of the people who are sort of the nouveau rich here really don't understand how to turn that into like generational wealth or anything like that. I say that because Shoigu's daughter gets a lot of criticism, as does Piskov's, and all of them. So, but
so then, like, when you're thinking about, how now when you look at Bakhmut, right? You think about how the upside down world. Like we talked about the two different streams of Western propaganda. I use the word propaganda neutrally. Like there's Russian propaganda. There's any propagation of the faith is propaganda. Information is never random. Even if everything that you're showing or saying is objectively correct, it's always whatever is in the frame. So there's whatever's outside of the frame was not outside of the frame for reasons, and some of those are on purpose, right? So how information works, we talk about how we're looking at things. In the West, you have the General Hodges worldview that you see through the Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and all this network, like on YouTube, right? And they're saying, okay, Ukraine is on the brink of launching a counteroffensive, but that brink could be July, right, or later in June, or whenever the soil hardens up. But also, Hodges was, even though he's the one who began to promote the spring offensive in the first place, because the people who were saying, Ukraine's taken a beating, were not the ones saying that Ukraine should be trying to take an offensive right now, right? They're the ones hoping that China would criticize Russia and that we could have some kind of ceasefire, right? So there's all kinds of things, actually, what the Biden administration is doing behind the scenes, or you actually can tease it out of their stated policy, right?
Yeah.
So then you have this General Hodges worldview that's influencing these black pillars and stuff. Like if you would want, and who knows what people want, but taking the face value, if you would nominally want Russia to win this war, right? But then you're saying, well, because Russia's controlled by the Jews, I can't listen to Russian propaganda. I want Russia to win, but all their information is Jewish Bolshevik information or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, so you can't listen to that. So then you're listening to General fucking Hodges. You see what I'm trying to say?
It sort of leads you to where there's absolutely nothing that could possibly be truth or valid information. And I think people don't really take it to that second step. They just sort of go with whatever they want. And again, when you have this very doomer outlook, I think it's just a matter of picking whatever information sort of, looks the worst, in a way. So yeah, it's really a very fascinating mentality of almost this like, maybe again, like with kind of what Nietzsche was going at, it's almost like a defense of one's own ego by any means necessary, when one also has a very low sense of self. Maybe that's kind of ultimately what's going on, because one of the big things that we would call insanity, people always say the cliche, it's insanity is doing the same thing over and over and repeating it. But when we actually talk about insanity, in a lot of ways, we kind of see that people just create these mechanisms of some kind of intellectual or ego self-defense of various different forms, or is some sort of a part of a grand fight to have this control over the horror that is existence. I forget who said that existence is horror. I should know that, but I don't. As in that we're these small peons that are mortal in this terrifying universe. And I think a lot of people just try to, again, throw out the sense of they're these all-knowing internet gods in order to fight against the horrors of the nothingness that's around us. Of course, we found a solution to the horror of the nothingness that we called Christianity, but that's not cool anymore.
Yeah, no, it's like if I was going to move to Russia, I would think that I would read I would read the introduction to the Constitution. Like it might even be part of some exam at some point, if I had to become a permanent resident or a citizen. No. That it says, we, the multinational people of the Russian Federation, united by a common fate on our land. Yeah. Right. So there you go.
Well, yeah. Well, here's one thing.
The multinational.
Let's break this down.
It's the multinational people of the Russian Federation is the focus there for me.
Yeah, but the one thing is what that guy would say was it was secretly written by that religious ethnicity we can't mention on YouTube during the 1990s out of spite. It was to spite the Russians because the Constitution is a lie. However, but in the same breath, in Russia, you basically the Russian language is mandatory. Like all the other sort of sub-languages can't be really infringed on, but children have to learn Russian in school. Russian has to be used throughout the entire country so far and so forth. Now, stuff like that sounds good from the Constitution that was created by the evil religious ethnic group in the 1990s goes unmentioned always.
Yeah, I mean the whole discourse, the whole idea is like this whole other ball of wax and is a whole thing to untangle. But what the main idea, like the main takeaway would be, okay, so there's nothing really worth fighting for that's convenient because I don't come from the class of people who fight. I come from the class of people that tells people to go fight. But we can hang out in the West, and then when Russia's destroyed, inevitably, and there's only a racially pure Russia. The thing is that, like, and I'm just, that's not what I think. That's that category of these black pill. The thing is that there were always, like, we had this guy come and visit us who was this total black pillar guy, nice personality, like friendly, to your face. He wasn't, he wasn't like whatever, a problem, but he was totally like he said, like, in essence he thought that he was entitled to be convinced, because I obviously there's some belief in that the good is possible, right, in what I'm doing, that I wouldn't do if I didn't believe that the good was possible or that the good was here. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I actually say that the good is here. So when he kind of wanted, we got together to have a few drinks. He had come to Belgrade and stuff like that. He expressed interest in working on one of these projects. And the reason that I speak to this, because the young man that you were talking to, the Rolo Slavisky or whatever, like many of the things that he's interested in, many of the things that are his subjects are, kind of formative to milieus that we're familiar with and that have been actually very important in the past decade, right? So the thing is that, but this is like a weird subdivision of that it's kind of like the alter ego. Like imagine having a criticism of modernity, right? Yeah. But then thinking that Russia was, more modern than California or something like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like kind of conflating. And I think you actually said, like, dude, it sounds like you're talking about California. Like these things he was talking about Russia that his friend also, tries to say is true. That I know the type because I'm in Serbia and I see Serbia through different lenses. And I know the type of people like that in Serbia who say those things. You know what I mean? Yeah, so yeah. I totally get it, right? But the guy is actually a product of Western education and Western processes and shit like that. And his audience is entirely Western.
Yeah.
right? So this is a thing, but the references and the other things that are interesting to him, for the age that he seems to be. If not, then he's just a guy doing something else. It's fine. But if you know, if he could be very naive or whatever, but he seems like he's maybe young, and the categories that if he just understood that the categories that he's focusing on are things that he are actually foundational, but that the premises themselves are not really thoroughly examined, and that he's kind of creating the categories that are the most important, but that this is subjective. And then he's trying to be very scientific and objective about critical categories that he's invented. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of narcissism in the process, because it's not how people interact on the subject. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, it's, people can see on the face of it that if you're saying, like, if all your information is coming from Ukrainian sources that are always the ones that inflate Ukraine's position, and then you're saying that, oh, I want Russia to win, but in order to win, they need to have some kind of change of power. Like, all of those are actually NATO tropes.
Well, yeah, or
right?
too, like he even mentioned, I believe that like we'll put it this way, Russia has gone in, and even at the beginning of the special military operation, when they were really outmanned, they took a lot of territory, and then they decided to sit there. But the fact that they kind of backed off Kharkov and that sort of a temporary blockade of Kiev, that is evidence that they've lost the war already. And like, remember, just going back, especially to like World War II, the Russians retreated basically the entire time until Stalingrad, and then after that Stalingrad, the Germans basically retreated the entire time. I don't know why we can't understand that there's
Russia's
an ebb
war
and
aims
flow
are not
to combat.
territorial. Russia's war aims are, well, the path to whether its aims are debatable, but the path to its aims, regardless of those aims, are best served using their best advantage and using basically, second generation warfare, artillery, and attriting the opponent. And if the opponent is there and you can strike them, and if you can eliminate them at a rate of 400 a day at a distance where your losses are 10-1, 10 Ukrainians to a Russian, or 7-1, according to the Washington Post release of the the Pentagon leak or whatever, then Russia can sustain that. And if that they can, there's different ways to achieve, there's different, there's 6 ways to do this. So I think there's not really a limit on time, except for the ones, obviously in the time of, for all time, there's not eternity, but in the way that Europe or the West sees time in the equation, Russia has a tremendous advantage. But anyway, I think, could you tell me then, just as an overview, what you think is happening now in how Russians in your milieu, or in, people know who you are looking at, is it, like you said, waiting for the ground to dry up and then there's going to be movement, or whether it's going to be, no one really knows. But I'm saying, what are the different theories that you've heard people talking about without like attaching yourself to any of them?
Well, yeah, that's definitely the number one theory, is it's sort of waiting for the ground to dry up. Let me attach myself to, let me go into some sort of a little bit of a darker theory of things, that this is my own thoughts, but based more on actually the way Russian society works. Now, anyone who moves here, and Joaquin, I'm going to answer about Bakhmut and all this. This is just a real long answer.
That's what we're here for. No, we're here for it. No, go for it.
Is that anyone who's here, I can tell you the story of a particular journalist that both of I know, we won't use his name. He buys an apartment, and one of his neighbors kind of hears his accent, and it's kind of like, who are you? What you doing here? You're Obama's killing people. This was during the Obama period. Obama's killing people all over the globe. Who the hell thinks you can live here? It's like, dude, I actually am a journalist, and I've been writing against Obama and all this international murder stuff for my entire adult life. I'm done with this stuff, man. I'm on your side. And his neighbor immediately kind of clicks, and that's it. In Russia, the question of whose side are you on is a huge part of Russian culture. And the Russians have been horribly, I don't know what you want to call it, disappointed, saddened, disgusted by the fact that in a lot of ways on the Ukrainian side, that a lot of people there, be they ethnic Russians, ethnic Ukrainians in quotes, Hungarians or whoever, were brainwashed enough to really seriously fight against Russia. And to an extent, remember, Joaquin, this is one of these core things about Russian society. Like, one thing is I criticize America for is our insane rulesiness, which is probably reflected in this gentleman we've been discussing his opinions. If it's written on a piece of paper, that means it is the word of God and you must do it. That is the American way, unfortunately. Whereas with Russia, one thing is this: whose side are you on? I cannot express to you how deep and how important that is. And I think certain people in power after the beginning of the war realized that, well, if they're already completely brainwashed against us, we might just have to clear them out. If you catch my drift. And I think that could be part of one of the reasons why not only is it also more politically expedient to have very few casualties, but I think that they're kind of consider Ukraine to be psychologically poisoned, and that they have to kill everyone who doesn't surrender. They will. That's my kind of personal hypothesis of what might be happening on a subconscious level. I don't think anyone involved in this has ever said this out loud, but I think that that's something that could be happening on that level. And that might really explain the let's just sit here and shoot factor. Again, another theory that you probably haven't heard too much of is that because Wagner this is one of these other things, because Wagner supposedly takes a lot of people who are in prison and gives them a second shot at life. That's one of the reasons why they kind of wanted to just stick Wagner to go fight in Bakhmut, because it doesn't really cause too many problems for society, and that the rest of the guys just sitting there and shooting works out really well as one of these explanations for why things are the way that they are. Now,
yeah, these guys get out of jail. They get to, they have military experience, but they're also in jail, gone to jail, but they had been excluded from the benefits for job or for pension or healthcare that come from being former military, because now they're a former convict or they're a convict. Yeah. So now they can get some of that stuff back, right? And they can go and fight in a Wagner unit and do that. But one of the things that obviously, as you're saying, if society can take it better, like that when they suffer losses, then you can see that from the perspective of Prigozhin or someone like him, hypothetically, would be in a difficult position because, yes, they could have probably, there's not an infinite number of shells, but they have more than they need. But there's different ways to use more than you need and what is need, right?
Yeah.
And, if they, the truth is that you could definitely have a strategy that involved withholding your artillery some so that you can use it more towards the end when each one is going to inflict greater losses. And then you can then make that seem like you're using more now because you're getting access to more now, instead of the metric of, since the space that the enemy is holding is shrinking, then each missile that you use is going to likely hit or be more devastating because the enemy is more concentrated, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like now, all the metric about lives that Prigozhin was giving about lives for versus artillery, right? Was probably true enough, but he's there to speak to the interests of the guys that serve under him, and they want to live. They don't want to die. But the economics of the war are enough that technically, your society is not as moved, when you die. And, there's a cost to all of this, right? So I don't know. It's weird. I mean, I'm not saying that there was intentional malice or whatever, but in any war, think about what Ukraine is doing. They're setting people up to just sit into holes until they get killed, 400 a day.
Yeah.
So right, and
Yeah, I mean, it's like I even remember long, long ago when I was still in high school, I was playing a war game against someone, and for some reason they sort of sent their troops in waves, like a first wave, a second wave, and a third wave. And I think that's just because that's like what the Romans did, or that's what's kind of, I don't know, militarily expected. Well, they just got gunned down because the first wave met my entire force, the second wave met my entire force, and the third wave met my entire force. And so also to an extent where in sort of the dark realities of war is one thing I've mentioned on my channel many times, which could be another theory counter to the theory I said before, the sort of the exact opposite. So please forgive me, I'm not being a hypocrite. These are all just kind of ideas that could conflict with each other. Is that, you know, the West has been focused on the PR victory, and Russia's been focused on the actual physical victory. And as long as the West is considered on this PR victory and they just have to send numbers, because numbers being sent sends a signal that the war is going on, that something is happening, that Ukraine is committed, so we can keep sending money. You see, it's like a bureaucratic justification system. And they don't see this as the loss of human life. They just see it as moving numbers to keep the money train going. And the Russians don't. And so if the opponent is going to continuously just send its men into from what I understand from listening to people like, especially Colonel McGregor, there's something like 100-mile or more sort of zone by the border where the Russians really have the ability to almost instantaneously react with artillery, thanks to the satellites, thanks to their air superiority, and information network. Something comes in with that sort of 120-mile zone, they know it, and they can hit it. So in a lot of ways, I think Russia's just happy with this. It's like me playing this war game. If this guy wants to divide his whole army into all these different waves and march them into my guns, okay. Obviously a war game isn't so bad because no one was harmed, not even metal miniatures. But I think that could be literally it. And perhaps why this guy chose to fight that way was some sort of feelings or psychological, or again, because the Romans had their, you know, the first group, I forgot what the second group's called, then the Traitiari in the background, and that's cool. Or Napoleon always had his skirmishers, his main line, and then the reserves. Who the hell knows? But I think it sort of mimics that general at the table emotional thing mixed in with this necessity for this PR. Because ultimately, Joaquin, what might be the real dark tragedy of this is this may sort of serve overall as like is an idea. This going back to the project from a New American Century, that the West's and America's foreign policy needs to be oriented towards destroying any potential nation to rise up. That's sort of an official foreign policy objective, but we may actually be seeing that the real deep down objective is just to steal money. That they're using that foreign policy project for New American Century strategy against Russia just to milk money. I think that that's starting to become more and more evident. They do not care about the numbers. They do not care about the results. I think that in Washington, if a counteroffensive was launched and all the mainstream media says it succeeded, they can send more billions of dollars and skim money off the top, and everyone's happy, in quotes.
Following up on your comment about the games, Pseudo Vikin said 30 years ago. I mean, that he has said in more recent years around, I think, Syria, that 30 years ago he was playing the game Command and Conquer.
Ooh, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, they're weird, right? So now you want to talk about postmodern, here's like a postmodern theme. Like here's a weird one, Tim, for you.
Okay.
So here's a guy, a Russian guy, right? Who's a general and commander now, right? And he in his youth and you know, his early adulthood, being behind, you know, clerk behind a desk in the Russian, you know, military bureaucracy or whatever at some point, or in school, playing Command and Conquer, and the characters of the Russian characters in Command and Conquer, right, and what Western tropes, what Westerners thought about Russians, like in the whole, the whole Western media, right? Like that's built into his understanding of how the West will perceive him. Weird, right? So anyway, it's perfect casting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even still, if we go to the Red Alert series of Command and Conquer, because the original one, it kind of just hinted that they were sort of like Eastern Russian people, but in that one, it's literally like Stalin lives much longer, and then super technology is invented in like the 50s, and it's very kitsch and corny. But yeah, you definitely see that. And to be honest, Joaquin, it's not just him. The entirety of Russia saw this, because no one, even to this day, no one stopped Rocky 3 was the one against Drago, or Rocky 4. The Rocky movie against the Soviets. Rocky 4. So that was, in theaters here and on TV and all that.
3 was Clever Lang, for reference. 3 was Clever Lang.
Okay.
Who, or was it, played by Mr. T, I think that was.
Yeah, and of course, the most legendary of all those kind of movies is Red Heat. That's probably number one when it comes to
right, yeah.
Inaccurate portrayal of life in Russia. But then again, Red Heat's now so old that life in Russia in 1985 is an abstract concept to someone who's 18 now, at the very best. So.
Well, yeah, no, it's just weird when you find like Kim Jong-un was a StarCraft player in boarding school in Switzerland. When he was in boarding school in Switzerland, like the boarding school for rich Asians, one of the several in Switzerland, like because they all speak Korean and eat their ramen noodles and stuff in their dorm rooms and stuff. They had like back in the day with the big hair and the R&B music and stuff, and the souping up the Hondas, the rice rockets and stuff like that. So playing StarCraft and stuff like this. So it's weird that the dictator of North Korea like participated in Western, South Korean and Asian expatriate culture, right? Like how they experienced the 90s. Oh
yeah, from what I understand, like in South Korea, the whole StarCraft like competitive scene is really something crazy. Like they love that. So yeah, so he's
Kim Jong-un was deep into the game. Yeah.
Well, that's also one of the reasons why I tell people in Russia, and I'm getting laughed at less, but I'm still not achieving anything. That one of Russia's biggest goals, it's kind of like after the United States bombed Japan, one of Russia's key objectives, come hell or high water, was to create their own Manhattan Project, and they did. Well, now it's Russia's got to create its own Hollywood and gaming industry. There is a gaming industry in Russia. I worked in it does exist, but I mean like do it big time. Perhaps the game.
It needs to happen. I have a lot of ideas. Well, we've talked. There's people I've tried to include, and maybe they'll get hip to the idea. Some people they don't understand how important or how big it is, and even trying to get a game together, you can start making money. Even from trying to get it together, and then you use that to make sure it gets done, and then you get people to buy in, etc. But you got to keep.
Part of the reason why I even made that alternative to Warhammer, that game, Joaquin, which may sound kind of weird, was it was something that I felt I could do because it's a manufactured product, not a video game, because I can't program, and I knew that trying to hire, I would never be able to generate. Maybe now I might be able to, who knows? But basically, to hire a few programmers for 6 months, that would be one hell of a Indiegogo or Kickstarter campaign. So I was kind of
you got to do the Kickstarter. You got to get like the biggest YouTubers in that genre to start hyping it, which means you got to give them shares. You got to give them some interest in the outcome.
As someone who doesn't have an MBA, when I was thinking of doing it as a video game, I sort of realized it was beyond my scope. Whereas doing it something that requires manufacturing that you can do in your house, that's when I took it on, and I did basically the Russian equivalent of Kickstarters called Boomstarter, and had a very successful campaign there. But anyways, the thing is,
you can't complete it without an MBA working on your side as part of your inner team.
Yeah, that sometimes you have to have a little humility and know we're gonna go way outside of our realm. If I would have maybe known some guy who had that skill set, maybe we could have done it. But nonetheless, one of the things I wanted to achieve with that game project, which did get released, by the way, so the game did get produced, was to actually sort of create something where you have this like 90s rock and roll ass kicking against monsters, but have all the characters essentially be Russians in the future. Because remember, the future of all these game worlds, be they miniatures games or video games, you have your Halo is America becomes the planet. Basically, Warhammer's kind of like England, Western Europe becomes the universe. And I kind of wanted to take this one where it's sort of a Russia-focused kind of universe. I don't think I really succeeded very well with the game world because I put more priority on the actual gameplay itself. But
they've got some Russians in the more modern or the more recent Warhammer iterations, like for Total War.
Oh yeah, the Vostroyans and the what is it, the Hellguard of Valhalla or whatever. But nonetheless, what I'm just trying to say is that I was trying to myself actually put my money where my mouth is, and I took on a business project and I put a hell of a lot of effort into it to break that cycle, so that way maybe some kids would grow up in Russia with a game that's sort of focused on what the sci-fi future of Russia would be. You see what I mean?
Right.
So
yeah, no, that's super important. Yeah, I know. I mean, and the thing about game development is that it's not something that's heavily focused on by intelligence organizations, it's not heavily focused on you're not going to get a hit piece written about you developing a game, so, there's a lot of things that are great about, but it's part of soft power. You're not supposed to say that ever.
Oh, dude, it is. And like even the term soft power exists in Russian, and yet still they
thanks
just
to you.
don't
You're
seem
like
to
the
get
guy.
it.
I think you translated it into Russian for the first time on a Yandex as a 28-year-old man, right?
I don't know about that. Maybe I can. I don't know if I can take credit for every term. See, the problem is, Joaquin, my memory's kind of bad. I think of terms. I might have been the first person to say visa passport during the beginnings of that certain disease period. I believe. Yeah. I think I was the very first person to write about that. But then again, some of your listeners who are more astute can go back to the articles written at that time, and maybe they can find someone before me who did it. But I'm gonna be a egocentric dick and say that that was my concept there. That's my mark on history. So, but Joaquin, I actually kind of have to get going here in like 10 minutes. So if we got maybe one final question or questions from the audience or something of that nature, I'd be thrilled to answer.
No, thanks for being on with us for a few hours here. It's been a nice morning and now afternoon for me, and always touching base with you. So many things happening now, in Bakhmut and all this. There's you have people are asking, is there some biography background info on XF in this chat or somewhere? No, there's no biographical information on me available at the time. Sorry. America and or the EU will probably blow apart before Russia does at this rate. Okay, mm-hmm. This is a long-time listener is asking.
Forgot, Joaquin, why Bakhmut's going so slow? The race to the bottom.
Well, here's the question. I have a question for you, though, from a long-time listener.
Sure.
It says, America and or the EU, this is Supreme Canon, America and or the EU will probably blow apart before Russia does at this rate. Do they seriously believe corruption and incompetence are exclusively an Eastern thing? Like, what's going on with this?
Oh, dude, they do. Because, you will always hear from, let's just say, people are kind of the more Republican side of things. Not necessarily, maybe sometimes you're more Alex Jones type, sometimes you're Ted Cruz Republicans, but they're always going to talk about, that corruption in Washington. No. But when they talk about Russia, they say it in a different way about how Russia is corrupt. And it's sort of like, we have corruption, but we're the sacred West. It's like, there are some flaws in our brilliant, gleaming exterior, but for Russia, it's an inherent quality. You know what I mean? So they definitely believe their own projection onto Russia on that one, which is based on truth, because there has been, and I'm sure still is, definitely a lot of corruption in Russia on various levels, but corruption is a pretty universal concept and is a bit more systemic. But I just wanted to say that I was going to mention earlier, a few minutes ago, is that with the whole Bakhmut thing, is that, remember, one of the reasons why this could be taking so long is if the West is just throwing everything it has and just draining itself in this fight. And Russian intelligence has proved to be really, really good in this war, of knowing where stuff is, knowing what's going to happen. So let's just say, hypothetically, Russian intelligence is really good. The West is being controlled by essentially bureaucrats who want to throw numbers at a problem for personal gain or PR reasons, this, that, the other. And the Russian forces actually want to win this war. If these sort of 3 points that I made are sort of all true at the same time, and Putin and the boys realize it, they can just sit there. Because the more they sit there, the more the West hammers nails into its own coffins. This could be just the real winning strategy. Sit and shoot. Not to defeat the Ukrainians, but to defeat the West as a whole. Another one that's
Kirby,
important, Joaquin,
yes.
of where Russians do not understand. I'm glad I thought of this. That irks me. This is how Russians do not understand the West. Is the Russians are also have been it's been sort of hinted at in the media here that they're very afraid of taking any sort of more radical action, not just because casualties at back home looks bad, but because they're afraid of provoking the West to do something radical. And I actually think it'd be the opposite. If Russia would have armed itself with like 100 million and a half guys and just bombed Kiev, did nothing else but just melted Kiev to the ground, this would be over. Because the West has a very different concept of war, and so I think that also could be a factor here. Is the Russians are very afraid, because remember, Russians do not like risk. Russians are extremely risk averse, except when it comes to like one drunk guy saying, "Dude, I can jump from this garage to the next garage. Watch this, motherfucker." About that, they're kind of brave, but about like business and stuff, very risk averse, and they could be really worried that any sort of major change in things could rearrange this puzzle into a way that doesn't work for them. So that could also be where some of the hesitancy comes from. So getting a lot of theories today.
No, it's good. Yeah, it's like it's the brain is a muscle. If you don't use it, it disappears. So I'm always. But I agree with what you're saying, and I want to thank you for hanging out with us this morning, this afternoon from Moscow, and just this is a very funny thing, of course, with the information war and how it's kind of played out, and these different tropes and different places that these different ideas percolate in, and where they come from, and it's very interesting. But thanks for being with us today, Tim, Kirby, the man, the mission. Tim, thanks.
All right, Joaquin, talk to you soon, man. I'm out. So anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video and you like the opinions coming out of my big fat mouth, then join up on my Telegram channel. That's Tim Kirby Hardcore on Telegram. Link, of course, in the description.